Welcome to the City Current Show. I'm your host, Andrew Bartolotta. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference, empowering the good in our community and around the globe. And today we're honored to host John Noltner, an award-winning storyteller and the creative force behind A Piece of My Mind, a multimedia arts project that uses the power of storytelling and art to bridge divides. John has traveled across continents to capture stories of human courage, grace, and resilience, believing firmly that art and photography can reshape communities. His latest book, Lessons on the Road to Peace, encapsulates a journey across the nation in search of common ground in a divisive time. Join us as we explore the depths of human connection, the beauty of our shared humanity, and the lessons learned along the way. John, my friend, thank you so much for joining us again.
Andrew, it's great to see you again. Thanks for having me.
Of course, we met back in 2019 at the Points of Light conference in Minnesota. We've interviewed you along the way through the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. And here we are, nearly a half decade later since we first met, which is hard to believe. And you're still continuing to power the good and inspire us here at City Current. But for those who may hear your name for the first time with us, tell us about the initial inspiration behind A Piece of My Mind and all the work that you've been doing since its inception.
Yeah, of course. It's hard to believe, but I've been working on this project for 15 years now, and it really started in my frustration with the quality of our national dialogue and my concern about all of the things that ask us to look at what divide us in the world. And I had to believe there was something I could do with my photography and storytelling instead to remember what connects us. And so the methodology is simple. We sit down with people from all different backgrounds, interview them for a conversation built around the question, what does peace mean to you? How do you work towards it in your life? And then we do a portrait, and we combine those stories and those images, and we share them out in traveling exhibits that go around the country. We share them out in books. The book that's sitting behind you is our third one. We've got our fourth one coming out in December of 2023. And we really hope to use these stories to help people see themselves in new and transformative ways.
You have exhibits and you have trainings and you have classes and courses. What motivated you to then embark on this 900-day journey with your wife, Karen, that led to this new book, Lessons on the Road to Peace?
In this really busy schedule, the pandemic just shut everything down. And in a period of 48 hours, our work went to zero. And so we were trying to figure out how we were going to sustain this work and how we were going to continue it. We figured out that we could still do new interviews. We couldn't do programming, but we could certainly sit with somebody outside and separate by 15 feet and put up a couple of microphones and be COVID safe. And so we actually decided to sell our house in Bloomington, Minnesota, the place where we raised our kids. They were grown and gone. We bought an RV and we hit the road, and we spent 2.5 years. We drove 93,000 miles across the country, which, if you do any sort of math at all, is not a straight line. We zigzagged all back and forth, but really being intentional about going into some of the difficult conversations in our country, going down to the border to talk about immigration, going to Skid Row to talk about housing security, going to Mississippi to talk about Confederate monuments, but always looking for people who believed that something better was possible. Always focusing on folks who are finding creative solutions to some of these really difficult challenges. And at the end of the day, you came away with hope that we're going to be okay, right? That there are these amazing people all throughout our country who are working for the common good, who want to find a way to craft, what our founders called the more perfect union, and find a way to live better together.
I love that. And I love that you intentionally visited the pain points across our country, because for many and for the average person, those are the places that either people are shying away from or are hearing certain narratives across the media, and you're saying, no, we're going to go there. We're going to get the people that are in the thick of it, and we are going to have those transparent and transformative conversations. What's really interesting to me is that, across this journey, you're going into places that you may have never visited before. And so, how do you select individuals and stories to feature in your project? And what is it like for you and your wife, Karen, as you're planning that 900 plus day journey across America to then say, here are the people we're going to sit down with? Is it more impromptu along the way? And then share a couple stories from your travels that really profoundly impacted you.
Oh, sure, sure. It of course looks a little different everywhere we go, but this is a really collaborative process. And so I depend heavily on finding an advocate or an ally in a community who understands this power of storytelling, who understands the network of people that live in that community, and who sort of understands the dynamics of the issues that we're trying to talk about. So I will explain our goals, and then I'll ask that advocate or ally to help connect us in a community. So because we were traveling for 2.5 years, we sort of had the luxury of time. And so when we came into a place, we would stay for a few weeks. And that first week, I would try to have interviews lined up. I would try to make sure we could be productive as soon as we hit the ground. But then we left this open space for serendipity and for wonderful surprises to unfold. And everybody I interviewed along the way, my parting question was, well, who else do I need to meet? Who else should I get to know? And in that way, it grew in this really beautiful and organic way. And I had the luxury of time to be able to follow up on those additional stories. And so, I mean, one example is down along the border when we were talking about immigration. It was a high school friend of mine who was working down there with a nonprofit around immigration issues, and India was able to help connect me to some of the people she knew. One of the people she knew was an artist named Alvaro Enciso, and Alvaro creates these beautiful, colorful crosses and brings them out into the desert. He's got this map that has the GPS coordinates from where migrants' remains have been found in the Sonoran Desert south of Tucson. People who came across the desert looking for a new life, but something tragic happened. And Alvaro says that he's not particularly Christian and he's not particularly political, but he wants to really acknowledge the loss of human life and sort of, in his words, to make the invisible visible again. And everywhere we go, have found these people. Like I said, sometimes I try to have things lined up, but also sometimes things fall in my lap. Like in Mississippi, in Columbus, Mississippi, I thought I was going to have a day off to do editing and downloading pictures and catching up on things. And I was standing in the coffee shop behind a guy named Neil, and we struck up a conversation. And I said, so what's your deal? What are you doing here? And he said, oh, I'm just paddling my canoe 7,500 miles across the country to try to remember what's beautiful about America again. And I thought, oh, I'm not actually going to get a day off, am I?
Yeah, there's
this
a
is an
story right
interview
there.
that has to happen. Yeah. But to have the opportunity to say yes when those doors open, to be able to walk through them. And we went out into the desert with Alvaro when he placed crosses. I got to sit down with Neil and talk about this huge epic journey he's on. And sometimes, most often in our day-to-day lives, we don't have the luxury of time to be able to do that. And it was an amazing experience to be able to dive into those conversations and learn from these people from so many different backgrounds.
I love that you say that, time is one thing that many of us struggle with, but to be open to know that usually the stories that will come your way, maybe those days that you already said, those are going to be my editing days, my day off, but then you leave moments of wonder and knowing that along the way and along your journey, you're going to find these beautiful stories that all deserve to be told and shared through many mediums and ways. And for you to be able to provide an opportunity for that is fantastic. And I think there's a lot of synergy between what you're doing and how the platform of cityCURRENT allows to have so many great people that usually you don't see on the 10 o'clock news, and you don't see across newspapers and media outlets for awards. They're doing work mostly in the shadows because they're so focused on the passion and the purpose that they have. And so for you to provide a platform to tell their story in such a beautiful way is fantastic. And it's one thing that I love following you on social media to see, but also then reading your books, which is so much fun. How has this journey really changed or reinforced your perception of America's cultural and social landscape?
Yeah, I think I want to say here that we suffer from a difficult narrative in our country. I think in a lot of ways we're stuck in a loop about seeing what's wrong and about seeing where the challenges are. And I do believe that it's important that we address our challenges honestly and directly, but I also think that we need to work on shifting our narrative. Because as I go through the country, I am meeting all of these people who are doing remarkable things, and I am seeing all of the hope and all of the healing and transformation that's happening. And I think we have to acknowledge that. And part of my goal, like yours, I think, is to amplify that and help get that some traction and help us understand ourselves in that new way. You know, in many ways, as a travel photographer for most of my career, it's been my job to find beauty in unexpected places. You know, people actually hire me to go into a place and see good where others might struggle to see it. And we've started applying that lens, not just to the geography and the landscape, but also to the humans that we encounter. And man, it is transformative to exercise and grow those muscles, right? That willingness to see the beauty and wisdom in everybody you encounter, whether they agree with you politically or not, whether they voted like you last election cycle or not, if they live like you or look like you or not. That ability to see that beauty is a muscle that we need to exercise. And my friend is Joe Davis is a spoken word artist, and he says we do best what we do most, which is to say we got to practice this stuff. And I think when you ask what has shifted in me during this process, I think it's the willingness and the ability to practice that skill of seeing that beauty and wisdom wherever we go. And that's what I hope people find in the book, is not just an example of that, but an encouragement to practice that simple methodology in their own lives.
Well said. And I think what's really cool about all of that too is that for many of us, and when you talk about the use of digital media, social media tools as well, it's knowing that some of your ordinary moments are extraordinary moments for others, and to be able to share those using social media as a platform to share the great things that you are doing, but also amplify others. And
Mm.
so many times in a selfie given world, we like to amplify the work that we're doing ourselves, but utilizing the tools and resources we have with our smartphones at our disposal every single day to amplify the voices and the people that are doing extraordinary work, regardless of, like you said, if they look like us, live like us, love like us. It's so great that what you're doing, and you provide such a comfortable space for people to share their stories. What would you say are some of the ways that you make people feel comfortable enough to really share those stories with you? Do you have a secret sauce when it comes to that? Or is it just John Noltner and his personality and how just everyone feels like we've known you forever?
I mean, I think part of it is what we bring to the table ourselves with our own personality. I tend to be insatiably curious about everything, and so I think that comes across in the conversations. But look, I am essentially the poster child of privilege, right? I'm a middle-aged, cisgendered white dude with two kids and a house in the suburbs, but a lot of the people I talk to do not share that same privilege. So it becomes really important for me in our process to try to minimize my filter and amplify the voices of the people who I talk to. Because at the end of the day, I want everybody I engage with to feel like they've been seen and heard and valued, and that they get to share themselves in the way that they want the world to understand who they are. And so right out of the gates, for every conversation, when I sit down, my first question for people is, if I didn't know anything about you, what would you want me to know? Because I've done hundreds of interviews. The people I sit down with often have not. And so sometimes they come a little bit nervous, and sometimes they come a little unsure of how this process is going to go. But by asking that question, how do you want to frame yourself? How do you want the world to see you? What do you want me to understand? It empowers the person I'm talking with to shape the narrative and to control that narrative of who they are. And I think right out of the gates, that really sets a tone of people feeling like they're heard. And from there, it's a journalistic process of deep listening. You do it in your interviews, of paying attention to what people say and picking up on little clues. And some of my favorite questions are just, what do you mean by that? Or tell me a little bit more. And I absolutely set aside my need to correct or coerce or convince somebody to believe and understand the world the way I do. I'm much more interested in understanding the way that they understand the world and the way they see the world. And if instead of an adversarial conversation, you can frame things in that curiosity and compassion and desire to understand, I think people can sense that really quickly, and then they feel heard. And when people feel heard, they'll share some really powerful things.
You can come from a lens of curiosity instead of that adversarial type conversation, like you were saying, because for so many people across socioeconomic divides that they have, it's that we all believe certain things. And when you take a minute to understand why someone may believe the way that they do, or understand their story or their passion and their purpose, you begin to have that empathetic um, relationship with them, to know that, okay, we may sit on different sides of the aisle when it comes to politics or religion or, fill in the blank, but to then know that you may believe differently but can respect one another is one thing that, across America and the world, is something that we can all do better at. And so listening is such a great an underutilized tool, especially in this world full of technology and instant gratification. And let's talk a little bit more about your book, Lessons on the Road to Peace, which will come out in January. And you've shared a sneak peek at your dedication page on your social media, which I loved. And it said, "For all those who believe something better is possible, for the ones who keep showing up to get us there." And you and your wife, Karen, you must have, I mean, John, you can travel anywhere now across the world, but especially across the United States. And you may know someone in especially that state, but many of the cities that you're visiting, which is such a unique thing that many people do not have the luxury of experiencing. But you've got some really great stories too. And I hope they live, through generations of the Noltners. But talk about what you hope Lessons on the Road to Peace will influence for your readers and viewers.
Yeah, Lessons on the Road to Peace is really a journey well, it's really a journal of this journey that we took about living small. We started out in a 34-foot trailer. Halfway through, we downsized into a van and got even smaller. About listening deeply and trying to hear the heart of our country. And in the process, we went some difficult places. We were in some historic moments. In Minneapolis, we spent time doing photographs at the intersection where George Floyd was killed in the days immediate, for every day for the week immediately after his death. We were along the border at the border wall on the day that construction stopped at the place where construction stopped. We were at the Supreme Court on the day when the Dobbs ruling dropped and changed the precedent of Roe v. Wade. So these really historic and oftentimes difficult places, but by being in proximity to these issues, by talking with people who were directly impacted by these policies and these issues, we started to understand things in a more nuanced and complex way. And what I really hope people will take away from this journey is a willingness to be in proximity to these issues, a curiosity to listen deeply, a willingness to challenge our own expectations and begin to see the world in new ways. Because I feel like in our world today, we've hardened our positions so much, and we will work overtime to find evidence that supports our belief system, and we will work overtime to ignore evidence that refutes it. It's confirmation bias. It's telling ourselves that we're right. And every time I enter into one of these situations, I start to understand the world in new ways. I start to recognize the shades and the complexity and the nuances in what are sometimes portrayed as black and white issues. And I hope that this journal of these travels will encourage other people to do the same. And not only that, but to continue to show up and to continue to stay at the table. Like the dedication said, to those who keep, showing up to get us there. All of these issues we're dealing with as a country are complicated and difficult. And when things get difficult and uncomfortable, I think we have to be willing to sit with that. I think we have to be willing to stay at the table and stay engaged, because the consequences of choosing a different path are not good. I think that only by staying engaged and by staying connected with our communities and the people around us can we find some little bit of hope to find a path forward together.
I love that. And I think, like you said, sitting in it and knowing that we are always looking for immediate solutions to problems, but many of the problems across our country are generations that is we've been dealing it for usually over like 100 years. And so for us to just expect that we know the answer, we know the solution, it's going to happen right away, that's usually not the case. But to then once again have that empathy to learn from others and then move towards some sort of solution, but know that it's not going to happen overnight is important too. What's
Well,
really
and let me just throw in there, Andrew,
please.
that I hope in the process we can resist the temptation to vilify those who think about things differently than us. If we can start to see that humanity and recognize the common humanity of the people that we might view as our adversaries or who are coming at things from a different direction, if we can hold on to that humanity, then I think we can hold on to some of the hope.
What are some ways that people can get involved or support A Piece of My Mind? Like you said, you have exhibitions, lectures, you have virtual trainings as well, and speaking. Talk about 2024. I'm sure you have stuff already lined up, but where can people go to really connect with you and have you come out to their city to learn more about what you're doing and have you show up?
Yeah, we connect with colleges and conferences and community centers all across the country. And I think in 2023, we're probably in 18 different states doing programming. If people go to our website, which is just spell out apieceofmymind.net, PEACE, they can look at our programming page and they can see some of the lectures and workshops and on-site studios where we gather local stories. And then they can just send me a note through our contact page. It's as easy as that. A Piece of My Mind is a really small shop. We are a 501c3, so if people believe in the power of storytelling, we invite them to donate. our programming helps support more programming, but it's really our growing donor base that allows us to go out and tell stories that are important to hear, even if they don't have a revenue stream attached to them. So if we're going to go do stories around public violence, or we're going to go do stories about people who are unhoused, things that don't have revenue or funding attached to them, it's our donor base that makes that possible. It was our donor base that made it possible for us to travel 2.5 years across the country, gathering these stories of hope and healing. And all of that information's on our website as well.
What would you say is as a piece of my mind is evolving throughout the years, what would you like for it to evolve into the next 5 years?
There's a lot of ways to answer that. One of our goals moving forward is to create more virtual content. So I'm going to be presenting or producing a series of online tutorials called 40 Days to Better Listening, Hearing the Heart of Humanity. And we'll use some of these stories and every day deliver a 5-minute video that shares a story, a little reflection on it, and then offers a prompt to the people that want to participate. And if they're doing it by themselves, they can journal the response. If they're doing it in a group, it can be a prompt for group discussion. One of the limitations for a piece of my mind is that I'm just one human being, and I have a really full schedule, but I know that there are other ways that we can engage people that won't run me 100 miles an hour nonstop all the time. And so we're going to try to produce some of that online content to share virtually that way. Probably within the next year, we're going to start an international series of stories. I have traveled to 4 continents doing some of this work, but we want to be really intentional to go into places like Rwanda and talk about how they moved through their genocide, to go to Northern Ireland and talk about how they moved through their sectarian violence. At some point, we'll go to Israel and Palestine to talk about some of the connections that are happening there. I realize now is a really difficult time for that, and I'm not a combat photographer, so I don't think that that's the place for me to do this work. But I also know that there are creative people who are doing really important work to bridge divides, even now in the midst of the conflict. And I really want to go into spaces like that and amplify some of those stories and say, even in the midst of this really horrific and difficult situation, there are still some glimmers of hope. There are still some people that are building connection. And so we'll probably start those international stories in the next year, and there's going to be a lot of learning about how to navigate language barriers, about how to work with translation, cultural differences, and just the logistics of connecting with people. It will be the same model of finding an advocate who can connect us to the local community, with the added challenge of culture and language and additional miles. But we'll figure it out as we go. We always continue to learn.
Absolutely. And there are some really cool AI tools when it comes to translation services, even like as you're speaking in your own dialect, where you can translate it across several different languages, which is mind blowing to me. And I'm sure even as this airs, the advancements are continuing to be made. So hopefully, with even the next year, there's some cool things there. So I'll make sure and share some of those links with you that I've found on
Educate
the
me.
way. Yes, please. And then selfishly, I think, I mean, I'm going to speak it into existence. I would love PBS or Discovery or another, media conglomerate to come alongside you and say, we believe in you and you're already doing tremendous work. But I would love a series or documentary along the lines of the work that you are doing, because it's so needed. And I remember watching like Lisa Ling's America or Our America or whatever, several years, even when I was in high school, while other people were watching, basketball games, football games. That's what I'm watching, because there are so many untold stories, and the work that you were doing is just tremendous. How can people once again support you and your efforts, and where can they go to purchase your book?
Yeah, the book is going to be on our website, which again is a pieceofmymind.net. Or if you don't want to type all those letters, you can just type the acronym APOMM.net. they'll find a huge archive of stories that we've told across the country and around the world. They will find resources like discussion questions and so on. They'll find access to all of our books and also a link to donate if this is the sort of work that they want to support. And when you talk about partnering with a documentary series, I tell you, I can see it. I'm ready for it. If there is someone that's listening to your platform that is interested in making that happen, let me know. It's again, I'm convinced that there's beauty and wisdom all around us, and I'm in love with this process from a piece of my mind of going out into the world and seeing it and amplifying it and using it to create additional hope in the world.
And you're doing that. One last question is, as you look years from now, what is the legacy that you want to leave behind for John Noltner with the thousands, possibly millions by then, that you've impacted through the work that you're doing, the people that you've met, the stories and that you've amplified, your children, your wife, your family? What is the legacy of John Noltner?
So the legacy, and this is something we're talking about with our board in this 5-year and 10-year plan. In the next 5 years, we're going to practice ways to grow this platform beyond John. We're going to look at ways to bring other people in, train them in this methodology and in this sort of programming, and grow the team a little bit. The goal is by 10 years that I can step away and that a piece of my mind is still this robust structure that can carry on. And at that point, I don't think I'll ever retire, but I think at that point I will become the ambassador, and I just get to go and talk and inspire and light little sparks and let the rest of the team come and backfill and turn those sparks into flames. So that's the long-term vision. We're going to work on it every day and see where it takes us.
I love it. Well, thank you, John, for a piece of my mind, also for coming on the City Current show, and for also amplifying diverse landscapes and individuals to really make a difference and remind us of the unifying threads of humanity. So thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate it, and we can't wait to have you back on again soon.
It's great to see you again, Andrew. Thanks for having me.